Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lysha from Lysha Be Creative, and in today's tutorial we are actually going to be doing a plaid tumbler. So this is the first part of a multi-video series that I'm doing all about plaids. Now I absolutely love plaids. I love plaid for fall, I love plaid for winter and Christmas and anything in between. But to be honest, I've actually never tried plaid on a cup. So what I'm going to be doing in this multi-video series is showing you the different ways that you can create a plaid look on your tumblers. So I hope that you enjoyed today's video. Of course, everything that I use will be listed and linked in the description box below. Please check that description box out for links to my social media as well as discount codes, and of course a link to my Facebook group, Lysha Be Creative Community. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first video of our plaid tumbler series. Okay, so we are going to be doing a hand glittered plaid today, my very first ever, and I can't wait to show you kind of how I'm going to do this plaid. So what I have here is a 12-ounce mug from the Steel Magnolia, and what I'm doing is I'm using 1-inch blue painter's tape, and I am creating vertical straight lines all the way around the tumbler. So a couple tricks that you can do for this is you certainly can purchase the template for this style from LB Creates, but I'm going to show you how you can do it with things you just have around your craft space. So using this vertical tape, I am cutting off and ripping strips of this blue painter's tape and then rubbing it along my clothing just to remove some of the stickiness. It is not necessary to prep your cup as far as painting it. I just had already had this tumbler painted and prepped because I had originally had a few other designs that I was going to be doing with this style that I ended up scrapping so that I could put together this plaid series. So I'm going to continue to go all the way around this tumbler with these vertical strips of tape, and you want to make sure that you're getting the tape as close to the tape in front of it as possible. So I have quite a few kind of white lines that you can see where you can see the tumbler underneath, and you definitely want to make sure that you are as close to the next tape line as possible and making sure that you don't have these white lines, and you'll see kind of why that is as we get closer to the seam or the other end of the tumbler on this cup. So just keep going along the tumbler until you have all of your strips of tape lined up against your cup. Again, take your time with this. Your lines, you want them to be straight so that you do get that crisp look. So certainly take your time with this process. I know sometimes getting a straight line on a cup, regardless of that it's a completely straight cup, can certainly be difficult at times for sure. So I'm also just tucking the extra tape that I may have on both the top or bottom, just inside or along the bottom of the cup. I am going to trim that up later, which you'll see me do as well. So as we get to this last section here, you'll notice that this last section is not a full inch wide, and I think a little bit of this had to do with the spacing that I left in between some of the tape lines, which would have made it a little bit wider, but we'll be able to still create a gorgeous cup because we are going to cover up that seam area with a decal. So now that I have the vertical lines on, I am taking a long piece of that same blue painter's tape, and I am going very close to the edge up top and going all the way around the tumbler in a straight line. So once I have secured the tape on the other side where the two ends meet, I'm just going to rip that edge, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sharp craft knife and I'm going to cut along the bottom edge. So essentially what I'm doing right now is creating my own template on my tumbler with my blue painter's tape. Now you could do this exact same thing by just purchasing the plaid template from LB Creates, which I will also link in the description box below for anybody who would like to go that route, but you can do this plaid look with painter's tape. So once I've cut all the way around, I'm just going to remove that row of painter's tape, that one solid line across the top, and I'm going to use this same painter's tape to go all the way down the cup. So lining up on that bottom edge of that tape line that I just cut through, and then putting that piece of painter's tape all the way around the cup and doing the same thing all the way down the tumbler. So I am going to fast forward this part of the video. There will be a lot of parts that I fast forward for this video. This plaid look does take quite a bit of time. It took me just to glitter about an hour and a half, and that was because I needed to do 2 coats, which I was fully aware that I'd have to do going into this original cup design. So there will be some times where I have to fast forward the video and play a little bit of music just to show you guys kind of the full length of how to create this plaid look. Now that our squares and tape lines have been established, I'm going to trim up the bottom edge. So using my cup edging tool, just like I would for a fabric or vinyl cup, I am going to cut the edge of this tumbler to remove some of that tape off the bottom of the cup. So I know that the bottom of my cup is going to be a solid color, and then obviously all of the squares around the cup will be different colors that incorporate the plaid look. So I'm just going to give this bottom rim a nice good trim, and then we're going to move on to the very fun but tedious part of glittering. So before I can glitter my cup, I have to establish what color all of my squares are going to be. So I'm taking a permanent marker, and what I am looking at is a plaid cup or a plaid design for reference. And so I am starting with my solid color, so my darkest color. So bird is going to be my darkest color, and I'm going every other square. So if I start at the top of a row, then I go to the middle, then I go to the bottom, and then when I go to the next row, vertical row, I make sure I start at the second square, not the top square. So essentially you're going to complete that all the way around. And then the next color that you're going to work on is the 2 colors that you're going to mix to create your second darkest color. So for the second darkest color, in a plaid, that surrounds your darkest color. So it creates kind of a diamond shape around your darkest colored glitter. So now I'm going all the way around the cup, and where I am putting the darkest, or D for darkest, I'm putting the M for mixed all the way around, creating that diamond or plus shaped look for the plaid. Now with my final color, pretty simple, pretty easy. All you're going to do is mark that on all the squares that haven't been marked for a color. So what is going to happen is then I'm going to remove certain squares at a time based on what colors I want to start with in order to be able to start the glittering part of this plaid. So starting with some medicine cups that I have poured out together and put a little bit of Mod Podge in, I'm going to just put a little bit of color in each of them. So I'm using my Arteza acrylic paints, and I'm putting the color Rose in one of the cups, and then I'm going to put a little bit of white in another cup, and then I'm going to have one cup that is just going to be straight Mod Podge. So I am tinting my Mod Podge in order to ensure that I am going to get really good coverage. I do still have to go in and do second coats, but I'd rather be able to only have to do 2 coats and not have to do more than 2 coats when it comes to using Mod Podge to apply my glitter. So now, since I'm starting with my darkest color, which is Bird, this is Bird from Peachy Olive Glitters, I'm going to be removing all of the squares on my cup that correspond to the darkest color. So I'm going to fast forward this part to where all the tape is removed, and then we'll get into glittering. Okay, so to start out my tumbler today, I'm going to be using pixie dust to glitter the bottom. I just figured glittering the bottom would be the easiest because it is the largest space, so I might as well get that piece out of the way. So just taking regular Mod Podge and applying a nice thin coat along the bottom, getting that bottom edge and rim, making sure that I am getting full coverage on my tumbler, and then applying my fine silver glitter, which is pixie dust from Glitter Makes It Glitter. So I do have a discount code for Glitter Makes It Glitter. Find that in the description box to save yourself a little bit of extra cash when purchasing a glitter. So now that that process is done, I'll do a little bit of a touch up on this just with some areas that got missed altogether with Mod Podge. Apply that and let that dry. So while that is drying, I'm going to work on the darkest color of my plaid first. All right, so let's jump right in to doing the darkest color of our plaid. So you'll notice I have a flat tipped paintbrush, and this is going to be a complete lifesaver for you. So big huge tip when it comes to glittering a full plaid, definitely make sure you have a flat tipped paintbrush. That way you can get into those little nooks and crannies when you're getting into Mod Podging your squares. So I'm going to just be working in sections and applying my tinted Mod Podge to the squares that I have left open. So these are all the darkest colors, the darkest colored squares that are going to be part of my plaid. So it's super important that you make sure that you get edge to edge with your Mod Podge, because you don't want there to be any white spaces on your tumbler, because then when you remove all of the tape or when you've completely glittered it, you'll have some really bare spaces and it won't look like a perfect square. So definitely take your time when it comes to this, and this is really what takes the longest when it comes to doing a glittered plaid. So I'm literally going to just go completely all the way around the cup, applying my tinted Mod Podge first in each of these sections, and then applying that darkest color, which is bird. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this section, and we're going to get to the final row, and then I'm going to show you kind of what we do next when it comes to this glitter plaid. Okay, so now I'm on my final row, and I am just brushing off the extra glitter with just a dry bristle brush. You'll also notice that when I apply my glitter, I also tap it down with my finger. So that's just kind of one of the things that I do. I've seen other makers do it too, and it really does help when using Mod Podge versus epoxy to make sure that that glitter does stick to those squares. So now that I have everything glittered for the darkest color, I'm going to go back through with plain Mod Podge, so it's not tinted. Don't use your tinted Mod Podge when you're going to touch up your squares, because you don't want it to cover your glitter. You want the Mod Podge to help cover any of the white space that may still be there, or where you don't have a whole lot of glitter. And when you use the tinted Mod Podge, it's almost like starting from scratch when you're covering it with that colored Mod Podge. So just going through and taking section by section and then applying a second coat of my darkest color. I like to do my second coats now while I'm on this color. That way I can just put this glitter color away altogether and not really have to do very much with it, because I know that when I get to the very end of glittering something, the last thing I want to do is go back when it's all done and try and do my second touches. So I like to kind of do this after I've done my first row, and then start with that very first row that I started with, because that is the one that is dry, and then make my way back around to the cup all the way. There's some squares that don't necessarily need a second coat, and I just did a little bit of Mod Podge application and a little bit of glitter where there was some bare space, but there definitely were some squares that definitely required a full second coat. So use your judgment in this piece. Obviously it is your cup, it is your design, certainly do with it as you wish. Just some tips and tricks to help you when you are doing a full glitter plaid. So let's go ahead and move on to removing the next sections of tape and applying our second glitter color. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to prep my mixed color of glitter together, which is going to be the mix of the two glitters I'm using. So I'm taking both Bird and Pinky Promise. These are two colors from Peachy Olive Glitters, and I'm mixing them 50-50 in a cup. So you want your mixed color to be lighter than your darkest, but darker than your lightest. So you want it to be a really good blend of the two colors, but you definitely don't want it to, number one, overtake your cup, and you also don't want it to be darker than your darkest color or too light where it blends into your lightest color. So it is kind of a unique kind of thing you have to look for when you're kind of blending your two colors together. And what I like to do is I like to take both my colors and just make sure that it is still going to be a standout color before I then use this mixed color to apply to my tumbler. So now I'm going to be removing all of the squares of painter's tape that have the M for mixed on it, which is all the way around that darkest color. So Bird is my darkest color, so I'm going to be creating a diamond shape, if you will, with all the M's, and those are going to be what I'm going to glitter with the mixed color. So this is the longest part of the glittering process, because this is the most amount of squares that you will have to glitter at any one time. So let's go ahead and fast forward removing the tape from this process and get to the glittering of these squares. And just like that, all of the squares are removed. Gosh, I wish it was that simple and that quick when you're actually doing it. So now just taking my plain Mod Podge, I didn't put any color in this one, and I am just applying, again, using that flat tipped paintbrush to apply a Mod Podge to my sections. So here we definitely want to be very careful because we already have glitter on the cup and we don't want to get any of our Mod Podge or new colored glitter on those squares because we want our lines of squares to remain as crisp as possible. So I'm going to go all the way around the cup applying a Mod Podge to those open white squares and using my dry brush when necessary to remove any of the extra glitter and being very careful not to get any of my new colored mixed glitter on the sections that I've already colored. So again, I'll fast forward through this process and I'll take you through to the very end of me glittering these sections before we move on to the final parts of glittering this plaid. Now that these sections are completely glittered, I'm just going around and using my dry brush to brush off the squares that still have a little bit of glitter on them because those are the squares that will have the final color, and I want to make sure that my lines in those sections are super crisp. So now I'll just go through and take a look and make sure there aren't any squares that need to be touched up. Again, some of them needed to be touched up, but definitely not all of them. So just again, using that plain Mod Podge and just applying the second coats of glitter where I felt necessary. Again, if you really wanted to, you could definitely go through the entire cup again and do your second coats, but I am one where I love the glittering process, but when you're sitting for an hour glittering, you get a little tired. So let's go ahead and move on to removing the final squares and getting the final color on this plaid, which really does bring it all back together. So in my final colors, I'm going to mix up just a little bit of paint, so a light pink paint, and I'm going to apply a little bit of white paint to this as well. I wanted to make sure I had a light pink and didn't have one in just a acrylic paint because the color that I'm using is a very faint pink glitter. The glitter that I'm using is Pinky Promise from Peachy Olive Glitters, and I wanted to make sure that it was light enough to help blend the color, but not too dark as to where it would kind of make the Pinky Promise appear to be much darker than it actually is. So now we're on to the home stretch of glittering here. So I'm going to be removing the final squares of this cup. And what you want to definitely make sure when you're removing these final squares, if you're using a weeding tool or tweezers or whatever you prefer to use when it comes to removing your tape, you want to obviously be extra careful as to not disturb the glitters around so that you don't have to go back and do any touch-ups. So obviously it would be super simple in case you accidentally nicked any of the glitter areas that are already done, but if you're careful with the start, you won't have to go back and go through the tedious work of applying a third coat of glitter in those sections. So I'm going to speed through this process once again and get to the glittering, and it is amazing how once you get to the final piece of the final glittering section of a plaid, how it just really brings the cup all together. Like all of a sudden you can truly see the plaid. It's hard to see, right? When you're looking at it now, you're like, oh, this doesn't look right. But as soon as you get that final color on there, you're like, wow, this really is a beautiful plaid. So let's fast forward and get to the glittering part and then finish up how we're going to seal and epoxy this cup. So as I mentioned, the final glitter for this cup is Pinky Promise from Peachy Olive Glitters. It's a really gorgeous light pink, and we're going to be applying that to these open squares here. Again, we have to be even more careful than we were for the second glitter that we applied when it comes to these squares, because now we have glitter on all sides of the open squares. So definitely taking your time and making sure that you're getting all of the white space on those sections before you're applying your glitter, and making sure not to get any of that colored or tinted Mod Podge on the sections that are already glittered. So you certainly could if you wanted to seal in between glitter colors. I just didn't feel it was necessary. I knew that I was going to be spray sealing this after I was done completely glittering it. I just knew I needed to go slow when it came to applying my coats of Mod Podge to make sure that I didn't get any of my glitters on my other sections. So I'm going to once again speed through this process and bring you to the final row of me glittering so that you can see this final cup in its glittered gorgeousness. So here this pretty pink plaid is in all her gorgeousness. So now that I have all the glitter applied, now I'm just going through to make sure that I have all of my glitter on there nice, and if there's anything that I need to touch up, now's that time to do any final touch-ups before we let this Mod Podge dry and then get into spray sealing it. So I'm just going to take the time to just really thoroughly go through my plaid and make sure that it is completely glittered, and if there are any spaces that are a little bit bare or need a little extra glitter, I'm going to go through and touch those up now. So as soon as I am done with the touching up phase of the glitter plaid. That is the last time I have to touch glitter, which is awesome for this cup. And what I'm going to do is I'll let it sit on the stand that I have in front of me for a couple hours to dry, and then I'm going to, of course, take 2 times clear Rust-Oleum spray paint and spray seal the heck out of this cup. So definitely making sure that I gave this cup probably a good 2 to 3 coats of that clear gloss spray paint, because I wanted to make sure that when I applied epoxy, excuse me, for whatever reason, I cannot get my words together today. But whenever I go to apply epoxy, I want to make sure that none of these glitters are going to move. Normally, it wouldn't be a big deal, but obviously with a plaid, we want to be able to see those super crisp and beautiful lines, and we want each color to stand out on its own. And it would be such a shame to get to this part, forget to seal, and then have your glitter colors mush all together and create a crazy looking mess. So definitely making sure that you seal a good 3 to 4 times. If you have quick coat or polyacrylic, that also is an option as well, but definitely when you're using those products, make sure that you are applying those 2 items to your cup, 1 color glitter at a time, because obviously when you use the same brush on those other colors, you're going to then be carrying that glitter into the next color, which is what we're trying to avoid here by spray sealing. So I'm going to fast forward and let's go on to after my cup has been epoxied and show you how I'm going to be applying my decal. So I've applied 3 coats of epoxy, and I have sanded both my top and bottom rim and any pokey bits, and now I'm going to create kind of a bleach spot for my decal. So I'm going to be covering up where that seam is, where the plaid met on the other side, to choose where to put my decal. So taking my flat white spray paint, I'm going to spray paint a small oval circle in this section and let that dry before I then apply my Waterslide decal. So here's a look at how I applied my white spray paint, and now we're going to go ahead and apply the Waterslide decal. Okay, so you could choose to apply another coat of epoxy to the cup, but I'm actually just going to skip epoxying and apply a thin layer of clear gloss spray to my cup. So when you're working with water slides, you want to make sure that you are applying your water slide to a glossy surface, and so you could epoxy to get that glossy surface or apply a coat of clear spray paint in order to get that surface glossy for your water slide to adhere to. So for this Hope decal, I got this from Sassy Tumbler Graphics. She has some absolutely amazing graphics and decals over in her shop, and I have a discount code for you guys in the description box. Please feel free to check that out. The discount code is good for anything except the $1 file section, but she has some of the most amazing decals and tumbler wraps for cups, so I certainly encourage you to check that out. The other thing I wanted to mention as I am soaking my water slide in my room temperature water here is I use an inkjet printer. I've gotten a few questions about that, and so when you're using an inkjet printer, you have to make sure that you seal your water slide before you cut it and apply it to your tumbler. So I seal mine with clear gloss spray paint, just like we've used throughout this cup tutorial so far. So I spray it 3 or 4 times until it is glossy to the feel or touch before I know that it's ready to be cut and applied to my cup. So I'm now going to take that Waterslide decal that is very easy to be moved from the backing, and again, holding one side and pulling back on the backing, remove that backing from the water slide very slowly and very carefully, and using my squeegee to get out any of the extra water and smooth out any of the wrinkles that may be happening as I'm attempting to apply this. So water slide decals should be just as simple as this. If you are having issues with applying water slide decals, it could be what you're choosing to spray seal with, or it could be the paper that you're using. I recommend using either Haze paper or Hippo water slide. Those have been the ones that have worked the absolute best for me. So certainly ones you may want to try if you're interested in using water slide. So this is all done. I'm going to let it dry and then put 2 final coats of epoxy, and then this is done. Let's look at the final results. Yet another cup that I absolutely love putting together. My first ever all glittered plaid, and for a wonderful, wonderful awareness, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So it was super exciting to be able to do this. I hope you guys are able to recreate it too. If you do, definitely make sure that you tag me on social media, and certainly feel free to follow me there as well. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.